when you get an entire industry, in this case, the construction and design industry, focused on the most sustainable buildings and the most sustainable, healthy building materials in the world, then you're talking about real change, lasting change, and a big impact, not just on your individual community, your own street, your own home, your own commercial building, but truly the world.
This is the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. Revitalizing the world together. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. My name is Neil Collins. Thank you for tuning in to this episode. It is just truly inspiring and humbling to be able to do work like this and to get to sit down and talk and interview with thought leaders that are working in the regenerative design and real estate space. Our guest today is Al Tozer of Tozer Design out of Bend, Oregon. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have Al on is not only is he an incredibly talented designer, but he has really been pioneering ecology meeting architecture in what he considers the field of deep green architecture. Al and his firm are credited with building the world's first Living Building Challenge certified residence in his town of Bend, Oregon. And if you're not familiar with the Living Building Challenge, you should go check it out, as well as their parent organization called the International Living Future Institute. Even my own organization, we have recently linked up with them because they are definitely the thought leaders and the pioneers in the regenerative design space. And we went through the rigorous process of becoming Living Future accredited. And not just us, but it's every single person that is going to be coming on to our sales team. They need to go through the Living Future accreditation process, because it means so much to us to have an organization pioneering a way to show people that this is what is possible. Not only is it necessary, but this is what's possible. And we are going to look up at that mountaintop and we're going to figure out how we're going to get there incrementally. And what we have seen is just them to explode onto the scene. And it's really getting to the point where they're talking about, how do we take the world's most rigorous and aspirational green building certification and scale it? And Al really gets into that with today's podcast. And it's also why we want to be a part of that ecology and a part of that system, so that if you are looking to make an impact in the built environment, if you want to live in a healthy building, if you want to develop these kinds of projects, we want to be there to help you along the way. Not only do we want to encourage you, but we want to help bring in our skill sets, which is finding, acquiring, and financing these kinds of projects. I'm just deeply inspired by the people that are coming out of the woodworks, largely due to this show, saying, hey, Neil, I love what you're putting out there. I love the concept of regenerative real estate. I want to know more and I want to participate. And so we're finding real estate agents that are in the epitome of transactional industry and transactional design, to come out and say, you know what, I'm inspired and I want to do something different. I want to be a change agent instead of a real estate agent. And so we are bringing on new agents as we speak from across the country, from New York to our home city of Portland, up to Vancouver, BC. We're talking with people in Mexico and Hawaii. And if you are interested in this, if you want to be a change agent, or if you know somebody else that is really looking to deepen their real estate practice, I really encourage you to check out Latitude. You can go to chooselatitude.com. You can follow us on Instagram or on other social media platforms like Medium, where we are developing more thought leaders. We've also got a great budding community on Facebook under the Regenerative Real Estate Group. So check us out and tune in to what Al is saying. I know that I've gone back and I've listened to the episode a couple times, and that's not just because I am the producer and editor of the show, but I am just so deeply moved by what Al and his firm has done. So without further ado, let's get into it. Have fun listening. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I'm really excited to have Al Tozer out of Bend, Oregon. Al is an architect, and he's famously known for the first residential living building challenge project to ever be complete. But Al, thank you so much for your time. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks for having me, Neil.
Al, your designs speak for themselves. So I hope, and I've said this to our listeners before, whenever we get into a podcast, I encourage them to search your name, look at some of your projects, because you can really start to get a sense of, who you are and where we're going. But even before what you're doing right now, I'd love to understand a little bit more about where you came from and your background.
Well, you bet. And I do want to clarify, I am not a licensed architect. I'm an architectural designer and a self-taught architectural designer. My background is actually in biology and ecology, and hence the deep interest of deep green architecture for me. The Tozer Design firm was founded about 25 years ago, and the first year of our practice, we won an environmental award for our first residential project. That project really was intended to and did set the tone for all of our design work to come. We wanted to make sure and emphasize sustainability from the concrete all the way up to the roofing material in a project. And so at that time, mid-1990s, it was not as easy to find sustainable materials in the marketplace, but we tried to keep things as local as we could. We put the project together, and really that was the start of our design work. The design work came from my intense interest in art and the blending of that art and architectural practice with the ecology and the biology. Prior to this career, I was a biology instructor at high school level and formed a curriculum that I call global ecology. And so I taught ecological systems and ecological processes to high school students in California and in Oregon, both.
And you're originally from Colorado, aren't you?
No, but I did spend some time in Colorado. I went to the University of Colorado in Boulder, Colorado, both for my undergraduate and my graduate degrees in biology.
What made you want to go into biology and ecology?
Well, that goes back even further, but I grew up around animals and on land in the Central California coast in a very small town. And we grew up, both myself and my sister, around farm animals. We had not a huge amount of property, but the property that we did had supported both 4-H and FFA projects. Are you familiar with those?
I'm familiar with 4-H, not the latter.
So as you know, 4-H takes many different forms, but animal husbandry and raising barnyard animals is part of that. That is the part that we were engaged in. And FFA is the Future Farmers of America group. And it's similar to 4-H, but it's a lot of it's high school oriented and vocational learning oriented. But in FFA as well, it was animal husbandry and steers and hogs that I was engaged with there. So raising those animals on land, taking care of that land, and being a steward to that land, that was made a big impact on me.
That's exactly why I like to get into people's backstories, is to understand, how did they get into doing sustainable or green real estate? And because that doesn't just happen. You don't just design these buildings that are integrated systems and they take into account ecology and place and equity and energy and all that. So you were a biology teacher, and we are going to get into what you are doing now, but I'm just infinitely fascinated how a biology teacher with a global ecology course gets interested in the built environment and goes down the designer route?
Yes, it's a good question, but right, it's a really good question. And it's actually hard to describe, other than my first goal with architecture was to design a home for my family, which I think is a yearning of many people. I don't think it's just singular for me. And because I wanted to do that, and because I had the time at the time, I started researching how to put something like that together. And as I researched more and more and started to draw on my own, I found that it was something that I absolutely loved. And then ended up having a bit of a talent for. So the general contractor and I that built the home together for our family, he, after that project was done, asked if I might do another one for another client. And so I agreed to do that. And that's how it all started. And from that point, it was really a blending of the ecology background and the architecture new work that I was doing.
What does that mean, that you're blending the ecology with the architecture? What did it look like early on?
Well, you mentioned integration and systems, ecological systems. That's really the way I always approach the architecture as well. How would this building best support the people living in that building, but not just the people in the building, also support the community as a whole as well. And when I say the word community, I'm not talking just about humans. I'm also talking about the plant community, the native plant community, the native animal community. So really an entire system. How would this building support all of that? This was before the Living Building Challenge, way before that. But my environmental studies background, my ecology background, just made me approach these projects in that manner. And it was super exciting to do that. So both from an energy system, solar energy early on, energy efficiency early on, and still, of course, both of those things play a large role in all of our work, but also that connection to place. So even in our very earliest projects, including that first one, the amount of glazing and the way to enter and exit the house, the ability to cross-ventilate the building. So we made sure and connected with the place, connected with the weather in the place, the orientation of the building, as you know, Neil, which is so incredibly important as we get into the northern and, of course, deep southern latitudes as well. So where to put the glass on the home and how much glass should be on the home. I did a lot of research in regard to early sustainable architecture, and I don't mean early in 2,000 years ago to 4,000 years ago. I mean the earlier movement in the green movement in the 70s, where they did some good things. They were certainly experimenting, and they also did some bad things as well. They were just trying new things out for the first time. And so the amount of glazing in a building was highly considered. The overhangs on the roof and how those overhangs interact with the path of the sun throughout the year. And of course, for me, my background in biology and ecology, I knew a little bit about native plant communities and what a plant community and an ecological community really meant and how they worked together. I knew a little bit about making sure I understood where the sun was at different parts of the year on every day of the year. And so all of that background informed all of our architecture as well. And as I moved into architecture full time, I found that our clients were absolutely delighted with the spaces that we created because they let that winter's sunlight flood across the interior of their home, but protected them from the hotter sunlight in the summertime. It allowed them the cross ventilation through every space in the house so that the project itself operated and even mimicked a deciduous shade tree throughout the course of the year. And looking at the climate here in Bend, a deciduous shade tree is an ideal place to live below throughout the course of the year. It loses its leaves in the winter, the sun filters through and warms the space under the tree. In the summer, it's fully flushed out with leaves, and it protects you from the summer sun with shade. But sitting under that tree, you have access to the gentle breezes throughout the year as well. So it all just became woven together, and then in the end, inseparable.
What did you envision whenever you did hang your shingle out? You had a couple clients.
Right.
Where did you see it going?
Well, I didn't know, of course, anything about the Living Building Challenge. It had yet to be created, but I had hoped that it would go in the direction of just uber sustainable residential structures, and to the point where certainly before Living Building Challenge, net zero homes were understood, and certainly that's the direction that I wanted to go in. But not just that, also healthy building materials too. So local building materials, supporting the local community, resourcing materials that were non-toxic, that were healthy to live with, durable, long-lasting, and of course aesthetically pleasing as well. So these were some of the things that we integrated in that first project that we did in the mid-90s. For example, Forest Stewardship Council certified lumber. Besides having grown up on property with animals, I spent a lot of time at a very early age and throughout my youth in the mountains around where I lived, backpacking and camping. And so I encountered forests all the time and spent a lot of time in forests. And then in Colorado, spent more time in higher elevations, in glaciers as well. And going back to the Sierras and going back to the Rockies today versus when I was a child, you can see the retreat of some of these glaciers that I remember being quite more extensive then. And this has been a very short time from a historical standpoint. But being engaged with that kind of environment, Forest Stewardship Council certified wood certainly was a must-do if the clients were open to doing so, because the most responsibly managed forest, of course, would be the most resilient, and they would be the most regenerative, and it would be a resource that we could tap throughout the rest of humanity. Clear-cut, massive clear-cutting forests would not be sustainable long run. So even from the early part of our practice, we had hoped to blend those types of regenerative and sustainable materials into the projects as well. Really, the Living Building Challenge codified a lot of the things that we were already doing, but then it even expanded upon that. As you well know, it's a pretty deeply thought and deeply considered program. And it's been super exciting to be part of that story in my own small way.
When did you first link up with the Living Building Challenge and the Living Future Institute? Was it for the Desert Rain Project?
It was for the Desert Rain Project, yes. Our clients did not know about the Living Building Challenge when they engaged us to do their home. They had just moved to Bend from Montana, and they wanted to do a deep green home, so a super green house. And they interviewed our firm. We had about 15 years under our belt at that point. And they interviewed 4 other firms here in Bend. And they, I think, awarded us the commission primarily because of our deep green background, but also our science-based background too, our ecology-based background. And that really was a draw for them. They were on a backpacking trip to Moab, Utah, and were listening to NPR along route. And we had already started the project with them. And Jason McLennan came on the radio and talked about the Living Building Challenge. Again, this was fairly early on, 2008, 2010, so a decade ago-ish. And they became super excited about that and pulled over and both called me and the general contractor and said, hey, have you heard of this? We would like to do this. And that's when I got engaged with the Living Building Challenge. And specifically, I think the first call I made was to Amanda Sturgeon. I don't know if you know Amanda.
She has been on this show.
Yes. So she and I spoke. She was in Portland at the time and not the CEO at that point. Jason was. And she and I chatted about it for a while. And then she referred me to other documents that I could start researching. And from that point on, that was our primary focus.
For those listeners that are not familiar with the Living Future Institute or the Living Building Challenge, why don't you give us a background of what it is and what it means?
Sure. The Living Building Challenge, again, founded by Jason McClendon and others. It wasn't just him in a silo by himself. And he had been a practicing architect for years, deeply involved in the LEED program, LEED, which many of your listeners are familiar with, but just felt it didn't go far enough. And really, if you listen to Jason's words, he will share that while those programs are good and they're less bad, it's not the ideal building we should be striving for. And so he wanted to try to codify, put to paper some green building standard that would really exemplify what good looks like, the best that the built environment can offer to not just the occupants of the built environment directly, but also to the planet. Hence the Living Building Challenge began. The Living Building Challenge, again, is a green building standard. For those familiar with LEED, which is another green building standard, arguably the world's most well-known building standard. The Living Building Challenge has some similarities, but in many ways it's completely different in that it is performance-based and you have to achieve these benchmarks. You have to be net zero energy, or now net positive energy. You have to be net positive water. And then the list goes on and on. There are things like the equity pedal that, at least early on, LEED did not have similarities there. Biophilic design has taken an immense role in the Living Building Challenge and is now being adopted by other green building standards as well. So it was really instantly at the vanguard of green building standards around the world, and arguably, I would say, remains so. There have been different versions of the Living Building Challenge over the years. Most recently, LBC 4.0 was released. And and again, in my mind, and I think in others as well, it remains the most ambitious, and some would say the most rigorous green building standard in the world.
Certainly the most aspirational. And
definitely the most aspirational, yes.
That's really why I think people are instantly gravitating towards the Living Future Institute and the Living Building Challenge, because instead of framing everything of we are going into collapse and we need to harness the energy and we need all this stuff to stave off doom and gloom, which is certainly in the back or forefront of everybody's thoughts, it poses a generative question of what could be.
Right.
And I think while they might not have known in 2009 what it could look like, and we still don't know exactly what it could look like because we have so much work, but it's opened up conversations that have really started to take off. And it started small and it's been growing. And I think where you have really carved off a name for yourself is that you were the first residential Living Building Challenge project out there. What was that experience like?
We didn't necessarily, Neil, shoot for being the first. And in many ways, it would have been a lot easier not being the first.
I would imagine you've still got some brain damage from it.
um, it was quite a process, and I have to say, and I might say this more than once, and if I do, that's okay, because it's okay to repeat this more than once, and that is that, especially at that time, I think even still today, either you as a practitioner of deep green architecture must be so compelling and convincing, but also articulate, intelligent, and knowledgeable with the data to be so compelling to your clients that there's no other direction that they could possibly think to go. Or I should say, or you have clients that are so passionate that there is no other direction that they could imagine going. And with Desert Rain, thankfully, we had both a project team and clients, which I consider part of the project team as well. But we had a combination of people that we assembled that was all of that and more. And if not, the project would never have come to fruition. There are many, well, there were, again, it's a bit easier now than it was then, but along the path to living certification, there are many opportunities to say, no, we've got to stop. We can't go any further. It's too expensive, or this takes too much time. We're thinking about this too much. We want to get in this house. We need to get this thing built and done. And luckily, we had very patient, deliberate, passionate clients who wanted to take it as far as they possibly could. And if they got to living certification, great. If they fell short, but they did everything they could to get there, also great. And so that was the process. Lots of laughter, and definitely some tears along the way as well. Lots of high fives and lots of frustrations. It was truly a roller coaster ride throughout the project, but in a way that makes the process so much richer. The depth of thought and conversation, and again, it would be nice to have Jason and Amanda in the room too, because they would appreciate this conversation. And that, because this is exactly what I think maybe perhaps Jason originally envisioned, and certainly Amanda understood quite well while she was at the Institute, and now even beyond, that, and you mentioned it earlier, it's the conversations and the depth of thinking about how best to put a project on the Earth's surface and honor the entire community of this planet. And that takes a lot of thought, and it takes a lot of conversation. And yes, it's going to have some positives and negatives along the way, but the journey was well worth it. They absolutely love the home. It is a refuge for them. It's certainly an achievement for them, and they appreciate what they did, but they also are eager for others to follow as well.
And looking at the project, not only does it meet the quantitative metrics, where you've got to generate your energy on site, you've got to harness the water that are falling from the skies, which you're in a high desert, so that's one of those mind-boggling things to think about. But you're honoring the place and the equity. You've got elements of biomimicry and certainly biophilia incorporated in there, and the systems is what I think the building scientist in me, or the interested building scientist in me, is what you come back to, because Bend is a hot climate in the summer and it's cold in the winter. And I know that there's no air conditioning, which is almost anathema in Bend. Can you speak to that? How does it is it a comfortable environment? Do they enjoy living there?
Very much so. It's an incredibly comfortable environment. Again, it gets back to the deciduous shade tree. We're unique in Bend, and yes, it does get cold and it does get hot. Speaking to the no air conditioning comment though, we have no humidity here. So because our air is so dry, it doesn't really hold the heat very well. In Atlanta, Georgia, when it's 90 plus degrees and 90% humidity, it's hard to escape that heat, even if you're in the shade. But here in Bend, the difference between your comfort level being in the direct sunlight in a 95-degree day and in the shade here on a 95-degree day is significant. And so we use that in our buildings. And if we can create shade that serves as a refuge for the occupants in the summertime, usually we don't need to pursue air conditioning. And I say the word usually. In Desert Rain, we did not. We decided not to do that. In several of our other projects, we've decided not to do that. And it's a joint decision. The clients decide with us. The trick here in Central Oregon and in other areas like Central Oregon, where we're abutting forest lands, is that with no air conditioning, we use a process of night flushing to cool the home down. And we load these projects with as much mass as we can as well, so that we condition that mass. And that mass, once conditioned, serves as our reservoir of cool or a reservoir of heat. Here in the summertime, we can see temperature swings as great as 30 degrees Fahrenheit over the course of 24 hours. So at night, we open everything up, the heat flushes out of the building, the cool sinks in. And when the cool sinks in, it conditions the mass that we've got inside the home. In Desert Rain, it's a concrete slab floor and 2 layers of sheetrock on all the walls. That much gypsum board is a lot of mass. Once you cool that down, first thing in the morning, you can close everything up, you trap that cool into that mass, and it keeps your home incredibly comfortable throughout the day. Even if it gets to 95, you can easily have the home inside at 72 degrees or 70 degrees, and it's 95 outside. The trick with that process, the other cool thing about that process is it's a manual process. You go around the home and you open those windows, you go around the home and you close them. Can you automate it? Yes, the Bullitt Center has automated all of that. If you're familiar with the Bullitt Center in Seattle. But I've always appreciated the manual aspect of operating your dwelling. It's almost like a sailboat in that it's a tactile experience to touch and engage with the place where you live. But the Bullitt Center is a Class A office building, 6 stories tall. A little bit harder for someone to take ownership of running around and opening and closing windows throughout the day and night there. But where you're living, it really gives you a connection to that structure. So that's how we got away with no air conditioning there, and how we get away with no air conditioning in other buildings that we design. There's one caveat to that, and that is forest fires. That's the
Your night flushing goes out the window.
that's the issue there, is that when you night flush during forest fires, you are also inviting a lot of smoke into your home. And so that is why more recently, some of our projects have decided to opt for air conditioning with a filtration system applied to it as well. We are, knock on wood, lucky this year. Last year was also a lucky summer. But as you know, we've had forest fires. We have a history of them. We will have them in the future. And it can be quite uncomfortable for weeks at a time when the smoke hangs over this area, super thick. But that's how we avoided air conditioning there. In the winter, the building is oriented in a manner, and the overhangs are designed in a manner to allow the sunlight to flood throughout the entire Desert Rain home. That sun comes in, it hits that slab floor, It warms that slab floor. Again, conditioning the mass. It can be 30 degrees and sunny outside and you have no heat on in Desert Rain at all. And it's 68, 70 degrees inside, completely comfortable. Now, I'm sure you already know this, but Desert Rain is a super insulated home as well. And that's always the balance with all of our projects. People want energy efficiency and super insulated envelopes, but then they also want that direct and indirect connection to place. And a lot of that involves incredibly large glazing or sliding glass walls. Well, sliding glass walls and big glazing is not the thermal envelope of a 12-inch thick insulated wall or 12-inch thick super insulated wall. So it is a balancing act, and it was with Desert Rain, and it is with all of our projects. But we've got 2 new projects, both shooting for net zero. One is going to be pursuing living certification again. So another living building challenge project. Yes.
To do it again.
To do it again. Yes.
And hopefully with less of a learning curve.
Yes.
We've talked about that, just the copious amount of hours that you had to spend on your team side researching materials.
Yes.
As well as I would imagine the trades having to do that.
Yes.
And I'm curious because we're doing a project in Bend, and the planning office quite so eloquently said that you Portlanders can't come in and just build buildings of glass and steel, and you've got to go through all these different design elements, and that's rightly their job. But to go at them with a gray water and black water system, I would imagine just blew their mind. Can you say that?
It did. Desert Rain, again, it was a challenge, and all that thought and that time and the client's patience played a huge role there. The conversations with the city of Bend started early with Desert Rain, but not early enough ever, really. Of course, with our new project, which is called River Sol, S-O-L, we started conversations with the city of Bend before we ever put pencil to paper. So the city of Bend knew about the project before most of the trades that we're working with knew about the project, because we went in first thing and we met with the lead building official. We met with planners. We actually had a city of Bend planner on our biophilic design exploration team for River Sol. So we are wanting to engage the city of Bend early on. And they learned a lot with Desert Rain. By the way, Neil, the city of Bend is very proud of Desert Rain. And so they know that it was the world's first residential living building. And many of them, not all, but many of the staff that were there then are still on board now. And so they'll actually refer to that project. And we've had conversations about Desert Rain as we are embarking on River Sol. So that relationship with the authority having jurisdiction is very key. It was for Desert Rain, and it will be for River Sol as well.
That's great. The institutional learning that they've been able to capture over the years.
Yes.
What a key stakeholder, and what a great move of putting one of them on your biophilic design committee.
He's a great young man, super talented, very creative. He did a great job participating and was actually super excited about it. A younger planning staffer, and he had studied the Living Building Challenge in school, so he was excited to play a role.
It's amazing to see the full cycle of people learning about these projects and then getting experience on them. And that's, we had said this going into it, but this is really why I love going into people's backstories and understanding, how did it evolve over time? Because you certainly, as we get into it, we stand on the shoulders of the giants that came before us, and you've certainly done a lot of hard lifting. I almost couldn't imagine doing what you did in the 1990s, which seemed to have been this weird nebulous era where it was still quite fringe and you're eating low-fat, healthy choice snacks and trying to
Right.
pretend like the world was still just fine. And now I think everybody is collectively waking up and they're realizing that not only is it a climate catastrophe, but we also have a health and wellness
Right.
issue from that we don't have enough time outdoors, to the materials that our houses are getting built with. Not just our houses, but every square inch of our built environment
Yes.
can be toxic towards human and environmental health. And that's really where I think a lot of people are starting to pick up this conversation, and why it's just so amazing to have you come on and share your experience to say, we're able to cut down on the learning curve. Where do you think you would like your career, or the deep green, God, what a great term, the deep green building industry to go? What is a vision for that?
Well, the Living Future Institute, formerly the International Living Future Institute, is really paving the pathway forward for where we need to be going. And so it's not me creating this, and Jason will, and Amanda will admit, it's not them either. They are part of a movement. They're doing what they can. We are all doing what we can to push the movement forward. But it's a movement that didn't start with any of us. I mean, you could go back to Dennis Hayes, who works out of the Bullitt Center in Seattle, the founder of Earth Day. And he'll tell you it certainly, he was part of the movement, but it didn't begin with him either. And it's been decades and centuries of people that want to honor and play a stewardship role in protecting Earth's flora and fauna and the ecosystems that we all depend on, as you well know. So we're doing what we can, and the Living Building Challenge, from a built environment standpoint, is doing more than really anyone else. If the things that the International Living Future Institute, if the programs they have created can scale up and expand around the world and motivate even 25%, which is a huge lift, but if it could affect 25% of the built environment, you are talking about now a massive impact on driving down the carbon emissions from the built environment, the toxic waste that's created by the building industries. And so from their Living Building Challenge to their Living Community Challenge to their Living Product Challenge to the Declare Label program, these are all things that are pushing us all in the right directions. So if all architecture students, for example, had a mandated course in the Living Building Challenge before they graduated, wouldn't that be a wonderful world? And I don't mean just in the United States, but internationally as well. What if all real estate agencies, not just yours, demanded that Living Future accreditation was part of their hiring process? So these are steps, all steps in the right direction. But when you get an entire industry, in this case, the construction and design industry, focused on the most sustainable buildings and the most sustainable, healthy building materials in the world, then you're talking about real change, lasting change, and a big impact, not just on your individual community, your own street, your own home, your own commercial building, but truly the world.
You knocked it out of Fenway Park with that statement. And I will even say it's not just the real estate and the built environment, but it is the regenerative design of business has so much catalytic power behind it. The Living Future Institute is a great example of this. If you started with an esoteric concept of what could good look like in the built environment, and it has flourished into, okay, here's the design criteria, but Al and his team are telling me that they have hours and days and weeks, and well, I think that project took you 5 years, if I'm not mistaken.
That sounds right.
A long time. But you had to go through so much of what kind of materials are you going to use and what trades and the design systems. And now they spurred off these things like the declare label, which is what's actually the externalities of the materials and the suppliers and the manufacturers. And to
Correct.
see that go off in a whole new realm, and the living communities, and their business is going through the same regenerative design, and not just informing the built environment, but how they're able to fractal out and continue to grow and make massive impact.
Right.
That just gets better and better and better over time. So how cool to be a part of the ecosystem.
Oh, it's super exciting. As you know, it's so exciting to me that I took a sabbatical from the architectural world and moved to Seattle and worked for the International Living Future Institute as the director of Living Building Challenge for them. And it was a wonderful experience to engage directly with Amanda and her crew up there, and Jason. What an inspiring place to be. I can't even begin to tell you the inspiration that you get working in a place like that, and the inspiration you get working with people that are mission driven in that deep, deep manner. It was truly incredible.
It's why we're on these calls right now, so I can tap into that inspiration and the knowledge and the wisdom that's come before. And Al, I just really appreciate your time, and I appreciate your work immensely. And I can't wait to see the next projects that are going to come out. And the new one is River Soul. Is that right?
River Soul, correct.
What's the anticipated timeline on that one?
Good question. The clients are asking me that too. So
putting you on the spot. They're paying.
No, I'm joking. They're super excited. We're all excited. And speaking of the longevity of the program and the handing down of information and expertise from one generation to the next, we put the band back together a little bit for River Soul. So we've got several Desert Rain alums, but in addition to that, we've got some young folks on the team this time around that we'd like to hand the baton off to so they can take it and start running as well. The general contractor's son is a licensed architect and just moved back to Bend from Colorado, and he is part of our team. We've got Tozer Design hired a materials intern, a young man who recently graduated from Whitman in Eastern Washington, and with a sustainability degree, and he's our materials guru now. So he's learning all about healthy and sustainable building materials. And then we've got several other people in the landscape area and other areas as well that are in their 20s and in their 30s, so that they can take the next steps forward and build upon what's come before. From a timing standpoint, River Soul, we're hoping to have all the architectural work done by October, so month after next. We're hoping to have all the materials as best we can, vetted and ready to roll by the end of November, ideally mid-November. That's what I've shared with everyone, mid-November. So hopefully by the end of November, before Thanksgiving holiday. And then we're hoping to break ground in March.
Excellent.
If we break ground in March, we'll hopefully get them in before the snow flies a year from this fall. And then, as you well know, there's a performance period with the Living Building Challenge. So they will have to live in the building consecutive 12 months and then prove that the building actually performs as it was intended to perform. Captures all of its own water, doesn't use any municipal water, doesn't send any sewage down the municipal sewage lines, generates all of its own power and more. As you know, we're now net positive energy with the Living Building Challenge. And that's over the course of the year, we have to prove that it's all performing well, in addition to other things like indoor air quality readings and things of that nature. So that's the timing for River Soul. It is named appropriately in that it is a riverfront property in downtown Bend. Really fantastic property. We had a couple of surprises recently about the land. It it was used improperly to bury some refuse from 1912 and 1914. So we're going to be doing some excavation and replacement of the original fill with some new fill before we ever get started building. But we will prevail. That's the phrase that the clients are using. So
did they know about the brownfield before?
They did not.
Oh
they
boy,
did not. No.
That's always fun to figure out.
Yeah, that was a surprise to them. Yes, but yes, we are moving forward. We know what we need to do. I do want to emphasize with River Soul too that, and Neil, I think on our earlier conversation, we talked about this a little bit, but in order to scale, these buildings can't be just for the uber wealthy. They need to be more universal than that. So one of the focuses of the River Soul team is to create architecture that is straightforward, relatively simple, so that we're spending the money where we need to spend the money on the systems, but the building is designed in a manner to perform. So the massing, the volumes, the shapes, the roof lines, the roof pitches, the orientation of the building all support a living building, but that to build this is not technically challenging. It's quite straightforward, so that most of the trades will be familiar with all of the building approaches that we're planning to use in River Soul. The goal here being that we'd like to put a living building on the ground in Bend that comes in at the same cost as a market rate custom home in Bend. If we can do that, then a lot more people will pick up the program and move forward.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. That was actually in my notes that I really wanted to get into, was market rate, because, well, I would imagine you take that out even into the future, and there's going to be more compression of pricing, just the more projects that get done. So it's
right.
Very much a snowballed movement and a valiant effort with such an important design goal to have that upfront, and not, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could also come in at an affordable budget that meets custom home pricing.
Right.
I think it's got to be thought of ahead of time, well ahead of time. So that's great, because the discussion around affordability is one that we haven't really gotten into on this show, but certainly such a crucial concept that needs to be talked about more in the built environment. So from here, Al, thank you. I am going to encourage everybody to tune in. I also think that your firm is one of those that stand out, that really excites me about what is going to come next, from more living building challenges to really living communities. That gets me extremely excited to see where you can go, because it's not just one living building project. It is an entire community of living buildings and net zeros. And I'm a big gardener, so it really encompasses what we're doing with our land and how we're utilizing it. But it's certainly inspiring, and I immensely appreciate the work that you're doing, and I know that the rest of the community does as well. Okay, everybody, that is a wrap. Thank you for tuning into this episode. I hope that you got a lot out of it. These conversations are so important to me, and they are so important to the times that we're finding ourselves in. If you want to connect with other like-minded individuals and with thought leaders in this movement, be sure to check out our Facebook group. It's called Regenerative Real Estate. You can find it, request to join. We'd love to have you build the community with us. If you want to find out more about us and our organization Latitude, you can go to chooselatitude.com. We're a Pacific Northwest-based real estate sales and development team that help people live in more thoughtful and resilient ways. We believe in sustainability as a powerful force for good, and that's why we're putting so much emphasis on creating meaningful dialogue and content like this podcast to bring it to you. Just one last ask before we end this podcast. If you could please go to whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on and leave us a rating and review and hit subscribe. That way you can get notified whenever we're dropping the next episode. And the feedback is great for us. It really validates what we're doing, and it really goes to signal to potential guests that, hey, people are tuning into this. They want to hear from you, and they want to hear about the regenerative real estate space. Okay, thanks again for listening. Until next time.